The clicking started on a Tuesday. At first, nobody in Millbrook paid much attention to it. Small towns in rural Pennsylvania were used to the sounds of nature crickets in summer, cicadas in their 17-year cycles, the occasional swarm of locusts passing through farmland. But this was different. This was wrong. Dr. Elena Vasquez heard it first while working late in her clinic. She'd been reviewing lab results when the sound filtered through the open window at rhythmic clicking, like thousands of tiny fingers tapping against glass. She walked to the window and peered out into the darkness of Main Street. Nothing moved in the orange glow of the streetlights. The sound continued. Elena closed the window and tried to ignore it, but the clicking persisted, muffled now but somehow more unsettling. It reminded her of something she'd heard once in medical school, during a lecture on tropical diseases. The sound of dermestid beetles consuming flesh in a body farm. She shuddered at the memory and forced herself to focus on her paperwork. By Wednesday morning, half the town had heard it. "It's coming from the woods," old Frank Miller insisted at the corner cafe, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug. "Been hunting these woods for 40 years. Never heard nothing like it. Probably whose cicadas offered Betty Chun." The cafe owner, though her voice lacked conviction, she'd heard it too, that incessant clicking that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Cicadas don't click," Frank muttered. "They buzz. This is different." Elena sat in her usual booth, listening to the conversation while picking at her breakfast. She'd barely slept, the clicking having worked its way into her dreams. Even now, in the bright morning light with the smell of coffee and bacon filling the air, she could still hear it, faint, distant, but persistent. Her phone buzzed. A text from her nurse, Carmen, Mrs. Hendricks in ER, says, "Bugs are in her walls, can you come?" Elena left money on the table and hurried out. The morning air was thick and humid, unusual for October. As she walked the 3 blocks to the small hospital, she noticed something odd. The birds were gone. No sparrows hopping along the sidewalk, no crows cawing from the telephone wires. The sky was empty and silent except for that distant, rhythmic clicking. Mrs. Hendricks was 67, a retired schoolteacher who lived alone in a Victorian house on Elm Street. When Elena entered the examination room, she found the woman sitting on the bed, her arms wrapped around herself, rocking slightly. "They're in the walls, Dr. Vasquez," she whispered, her eyes wide and unfocused. "I can hear them, thousands of them, clicking and scratching and crawling." "Mrs. Hendricks, when did this start?" "Last night I woke up around 3, and I heard them. I thought maybe it was mice at first, but mice don't sound like that. They sound ... organized, like they're working together." She grabbed Elena's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "You have to believe me, I'm not crazy. Something is wrong in this town." Elena examined her carefully. Blood pressure slightly elevated, pupils normal, no signs of stroke or other neurological issues. Just fear, deep, primal fear. "I believe you're hearing something," Elena said gently. "Let me send someone to check your house. In the meantime, why don't you stay with your daughter for a few days?" But Mrs. Hendricks shook her head violently. No, I can't leave. If I leave, they'll take over. Someone has to watch. Someone has to stay." By Wednesday evening, 6 more people had come to the clinic with similar complaints. Bugs in the walls, clicking sounds at night, the sensation of being watched by countless tiny eyes. Elena couldn't diagnose mass hysteria, but she couldn't explain the collective fear gripping the town either. She was locking up the clinic when she saw them. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. The sidewalk seemed to be moving, rippling like water, but as she stepped closer, her flashlight revealed the truth. Insects, thousands of them, beetles, she thought, though unlike any species she recognized. They were roughly the size of her thumbnail, with dark, iridescent shells that reflected the streetlight in oily rainbow patterns. But it was their legs that made her stomach turn to many legs, at least 10 per insect, all moving in perfect synchronization. The swarm flowed across the sidewalk like a living carpet, moving with disturbing purpose toward the old storefront next to her clinic. Elena watched, transfixed with horror, as they found a crack in the foundation and began pouring inside, one after another, an endless stream of clicking, crawling bodies. She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking. "Who did you call for an insect invasion?" "Animal control, the health department." She dialed the sheriff's office. Sheriff Holloway's phone answered Deputy Marcus Webb, young and generally "Marcus, it's Dr. Vasquez. You need to get to Main Street right now. There's a swarm of insects, thousands of them, and they're entering buildings." A pause. "We've been getting calls all evening, Doc. They're everywhere." The sheriff's coordinating with the county extension office, trying to figure out what they are. "Have they seen them? Have they actually looked at them?" "I don't know, but Doc, You should get home, lock your doors and windows. The sheriff says to stay inside until we know what we're dealing with." Elena ended the call and looked back at the swarm. The last of them were disappearing into the crack, but she could still hear that clicking, now coming from inside the building. She thought about Mrs. Hendricks, about the fear in her eyes. Someone has to watch, against every instinct screaming at her to run. Elena approached the building. It was an old hardware store that had been closed for years. Through the dirty window, she could see movement in the darkness, shapes flowing across the floor, up the walls, across the ceiling. The clicking was louder now, almost deafening. She pulled out her phone and started recording video, though she knew the darkness would make it nearly useless. But she needed evidence. She needed someone to believe what was happening. That's when she saw the rats. 3 of them burst from a hole in the building's foundation, squealing in terror. They ran directly toward her, past her, not caring about the human in their path. They were running from something. Elena turned to watch them go and saw what was pursuing them. More insects, but these were different. Larger, faster, with mandibles that clicked open and shut like shears. They moved with predatory intent, their many legs carrying them at impossible speeds. One caught up to a rat, leaped onto its back, and Elena turned away, but not before she saw the rat collapse, its squeals cutting off abruptly. When she forced herself to look again, the insects were covering the body, their mandibles working busily, that clicking sound intensifying into a feeding frenzy. She ran. Elena didn't stop until she reached her car 3 blocks away. Her hands shook so badly she could barely get the key in the ignition. As she drove through town toward her house on the outskirts, she saw them everywhere. Swarms flowing through the streets, clustering around streetlights, covering the sides of buildings, and the people, those who hadn't yet locked themselves inside, were running, screaming, trying to escape the rising tide of chitinous bodies. Her phone rang. "Sheriff Holloway. Doc, where are you?" "Heading home, Tom. They're everywhere. They're aggressive. I saw them kill a rat in seconds." "I know. We've got reports coming in from all over town. Whatever these things are, they're not normal. I've called the State Emergency Management Office, but they're saying it'll be morning before anyone can get here." He paused. "There's something else. The phones are going down. Cell towers too. It's like they're targeting infrastructure. Insects don't target infrastructure, Tom. These ones do. I watched a swarm climb up a cell tower 20 minutes ago. 5 minutes later, the tower went dead. They're not just swarming, Elena, they're organized." She pulled into her driveway, an isolated house surrounded by woods. For the first time in her life, she regretted living so far from town. "Tom, what do we do?" "Seal your house. Every crack, every vent, every window. Use tape, towels, whatever you have." "And Elena," his voice dropped, "if they get inside, I don't know. Just don't let them get inside." The line went dead. Elena sat in her car for a moment, staring at her house. It was a small ranch-style, wood-framed, with more gaps and cracks than she wanted to think about. In the distance, she could hear that clicking, getting louder, getting closer. She grabbed her medical bag from the passenger seat and ran for the front door. Inside, she locked the deadbolt and slid the chain into place. Then she went through every room, methodically checking windows and doors. The clicking was louder now, close enough that it seemed to be coming from inside the walls. She pushed the thought away and focused on the task. Towels stuffed under doors. Duct tape around window frames. A sheet hung over the fireplace. She worked frantically, knowing it wouldn't be enough, knowing that these creatures, whatever they were, would find a way in, but she had to try. The power went out at 9 p.m. Elena froze in the darkness, her flashlight the only source of light. The clicking stopped. Complete silence descended on the house, and somehow that was worse than the noise. It meant they were close. It meant they were listening. She moved to the living room window and carefully pulled back the curtain. Her flashlight beam illuminated the yard, and what she saw made her blood run cold. They covered everything. The grass, the trees, her Karevi surface was a writhing mass of insects. As she watched, more emerged from the woods, an endless tide of clicking, crawling bodies. They moved toward the house with clear purpose, flowing up the walls, testing windows, probing for entry points. A sound from the kitchen made her spin around. Clicking. Inside the house, Elena ran to the kitchen and swept her flashlight across the room. There near the sink, water pipes. She'd forgotten to seal where the pipes came through the wall. A steady stream of insects was pouring out of the gap, spreading across the counter, down the cabinets, across the floor. She grabbed a can of insect spray from under the sink and emptied it on the swarm. The insects recoiled, some dying, others retreating back into the wall. But there were too many. For every one she killed, 10 more emerged. Elena backed away, her mind racing. The bathroom, smaller, easier to defend, with a door that actually sealed properly. She ran, slamming the bathroom door behind her and stuffing a towel under it. Then she sat on the edge of the tub, her flashlight pointed at the door, and waited. The clicking returned, louder than ever. They were in the house now, spreading through it. She could hear them in the walls, in the ceiling, probably in the crawlspace beneath her feet. The towel under the door moved slightly, and she watched in horror as a single insect squeezed underneath. It sat there on the tile, its many legs twitching, as if studying her. The light from her flashlight reflected off its shell in that unsettling, oily rainbow pattern. Then it began clicking, a rapid staccato that seemed almost like communication. Within seconds, more insects were forcing their way under the door. Elena stood on the toilet, her back pressed against the wall, watching helplessly as they filled the bathroom floor. They moved in concentric circles, flowing around the toilet, the sink, never breaking formation. The clicking synchronized into a single rhythm, and Elena realized with mounting terror that Mrs. Hendricks had been right. They were organized. They were working together, and they were surrounding her. The flashlight flickered, battery dying. Elena's hand trembled as she reached for her phone to use its light instead, but found the screen dead. No signal, no power. She was alone in the darkness with creatures that seemed to have no fear, no hesitation, no natural predator. The flashlight died. In the absolute blackness, the clicking intensified. She could feel them now, climbing the toilet, reaching for her feet. She tried to pull her legs up higher, but there was nowhere to go. One touched her ankle, and she kicked reflexively, but more kept coming. They were on her shoes now, her legs. She could feel their legs gripping her clothing, pulling themselves upward. Panic overwhelmed reason, and she screamed a raw, primal sound that did nothing to stop their advance. The clicking grew louder, almost deafening, and through it, Elena thought she could hear something else. A pattern, a rhythm that was almost like language, like thousands of tiny voices speaking in unison, communicating something she couldn't understand but could feel in her bones. They reached her hands, her arms, her neck. Then, as suddenly as it had started, they stopped. The clicking ceased. The insects went still. In the suffocating silence, Elena stood frozen, her skin crawling with the weight of countless bodies, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. A new sound emerged from the darkness. A single click, then another, then a third, like someone counting, like something counting. Elena's mind reeled. Insects didn't count. Insects didn't communicate. Insects didn't organize like this. Whatever these things were, they weren't natural. They couldn't be. Light suddenly flooded through the window, not electricity, but headlights. A car was in her driveway. She heard a door slam, then shouting, "Elena, Dr. Vasquez, are you in there?" "Marcus Webb, the deputy. I'm in the bathroom." She managed to scream, "Don't come in, they're everywhere." But the front door crashed open, and she heard Marcus curse, followed by the sound of something being sprayed. The insects on her body suddenly released their grip and dropped to the floor. She risked reaching down, feeling for the doorknob, and yanked the bathroom door open. Marcus stood in her hallway, illuminated by a powerful flashlight mounted on his shotgun. He was wearing a hazmat suit and holding some kind of industrial sprayer. White foam covered the hallway floor, and the insects, those that weren't dead, were retreating. "Come on," he shouted. "We have to go now." Elena stumbled forward, and Marcus grabbed her arm, pulling her through the house. Dead and dying insects crunched under their feet. Outside, more deputies waited in hazmat suits, forming a protective circle around an armored vehicle. "Get in." Marcus pushed her toward the vehicle. As they drove away, Elena looked back at her house. The exterior was completely covered in insects, a living, shifting shell of bodies. They were entering through every opening, claiming the structure as their own. "Where are we going?" she asked. "High school," Marcus said, his voice muffled by the hazmat suit. "It's the evacuation center. Concrete building, easier to seal. Most of the town is already there." "How bad is it?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. Finally, "Bad. Really bad. We've lost contact with county. The roads out of town are blocked not by barriers, but by them. Millions of them, maybe billions. It's like they're containing us, keeping us here. That's impossible. Insects don't." "I know what insects don't do, Doc, but these things, they're different. The sheriff thinks they might be some kind of mutation, or maybe an experiment gone wrong. There's a research facility about 50 miles from here, does work with bioengineering." He glanced at her. "Whatever they are, they're smart, and they're trying to kill us." The high school came into view, its parking lot filled with cars and trucks. Floodlights had been set up, running on generators, creating an island of light in the darkness. Elena could see the perimeter, a hastily constructed barrier of vehicles and sandbags, with armed deputies patrolling. But even from a distance, she could see them. Swarms of insects testing the defenses, probing for weaknesses, clicking in that horrible synchronized rhythm. Marcus pulled up to the entrance, and other deputies in hazmat suits quickly ushered Elena inside. The doors slammed shut behind her, and she found herself in a gymnasium filled with frightened townspeople. Families huddled together on bleachers, children crying, adults speaking in hushed, panicked tones. Sheriff Holloway approached, his face grim. "Dr. Vasquez, thank God you're safe. We need you. People are injured, and you're the only doctor we've got." Elena nodded, forcing herself into professional mode, despite the terror still coursing through her veins. "Show me what you've got." He led her to the school nurse's office, which had been converted into a makeshift triage center. What she saw there made her wish she'd died in her bathroom. The first patient was a teenage boy, maybe 16. His arms were covered in bites, not ordinary insect bites, but deep necrotic wounds that looked like chemical burns. The flesh around each bite was turning black, spreading outward in web-like patterns. "They inject something," Sheriff Holloway explained. "Some kind of venom or acid. It spreads fast. We've had 3 people die already from systemic shock." Elena examined the wounds closely, her medical training warring with her disgust. The tissue damage was unlike anything she'd seen. It wasn't just destroying the flesh, it was transforming it, breaking it down at a molecular level. "I need to see one of these insects," she said. "A dead one. I need to understand what we're dealing with." The sheriff produced a glass jar. Inside, preserved in alcohol, was one of the creatures. Elena studied it under a magnifying glass, and what she saw defied explanation. The insect had 10 legs, as she'd observed before, but the leg structure was wrong. Too complex, with joints that bent in ways no natural arthropod's legs should bend. The mandibles were lined with what looked like needle-sharp teeth, and near the head she could see a pair of glands that probably produced the venom, but it was the eyes that disturbed her most. Instead of the compound eyes typical of insects, these had what looked almost like camera lenses, multiple layers of transparent chitin, arranged in a way that suggested sophisticated visual processing. "This isn't natural," she whispered. "This is engineered. We figured as much. Question is, by who, and how do we stop them?" Before Elena could answer, an alarm sounded. Over the intercom, a deputy's voice cracked with fear. "Breach in the cafeteria. They're coming through the vents." Everyone moved to the gymnasium now. Chaos erupted. People screamed, grabbed their children, and ran for the gymnasium. Elena followed Sheriff Holloway as he rushed toward the cafeteria, shotgun raised. They found Deputy Chen standing in the doorway, his face pale. "Sir, you need to see this." The cafeteria looked like something from a nightmare. Every vent, every ceiling tile, every crack in the walls was spewing insects. But they weren't attacking. They were building. The swarms had arranged themselves into structures, towers, walls, bridges made entirely of their bodies. They clicked in perfect unison, and Elena realized they were creating some kind of hive, transforming the cafeteria into their own space. "Fall back," the sheriff ordered. "Seal this section of the building." As they retreated, Elena caught one last glimpse of the cafeteria. At the center of the structures, where the largest tower of insects was forming, she saw something that made her blood freeze. A cocoon, man-sized, and something inside it was moving. Part 2. False Hope. The gymnasium had become a fortress of fear. Sheriff Holloway ordered steel doors welded shut to seal off the compromised sections of the building. The sound of blowtorches echoed through the halls, mixing with the distant, ever-present clicking that seemed to seep through the very walls. Elena worked through the night, treating the wounded. 7 more people had been bitten, and the necrotic spread was accelerating. The youngest victim was a girl named Sophie, barely 9 years old, who'd been caught by the swarm when her family tried to evacuate their home. Her mother sat beside the cot, holding her daughter's hand, tears streaming silently down her face as the black veins spread up Sophie's arm. "How long?" the mother whispered. Elena couldn't meet her eyes. "I don't know. Without proper equipment, without knowing what the venom is," she stopped. What was the point of false hope? Hours, maybe less. The mother's grip tightened on her daughter's hand. Sophie was unconscious now, her breathing shallow. The black veins had reached her shoulder. There has to be something, some treatment, some "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Elena moved to the next patient, her heart heavy with the weight of helplessness. She'd become a doctor to save lives, but here, in this nightmare, all she could do was watch people die. Around 3 a.m., Marcus Webb found her. "Doc, the sheriff wants you. We've made contact." "Contact with who?" "The outside world." "Come on." They hurried to the principal's office, where Sheriff Holloway was hunched over a satellite phone, one of the few communication devices still working. His face showed the first glimmer of hope Elena had seen since this began. Yes, sir, approximately 800 civilians. Yes, we've had casualties, at least 15 dead, dozens injured. He paused, listening. I understand. How long? Another pause. His expression darkened. That's not here, sir. We'll do our best. He ended the call and looked at the assembled group. Elena, Marcus, Deputy Chen, and Frank Miller, who'd taken charge of organizing the civilian defenders. That was Colonel Hayes at Fort Detrick, military bioweapons facility, about 200 miles from here. He says they're aware of the situation. They're aware. Marcus's voice rose. How the hell are they aware when we've been cut off? Satellite imagery. They've been watching since yesterday morning. The sheriff's jaw tightened. They know about the swarm. Then where's our help? Frank demanded. Where's the cavalry? Sheriff Holloway's silence said everything. No, Elena breathed. No, they can't just leave us here. They're not leaving us, they're assessing. Colonel Hayes said the swarm is ... unprecedented. The military doesn't have protocol for something like this. They need to study it, understand it, before they risk sending in troops. Study it. Elena's voice shook with rage. People are dying. Children are dying. I know. The sheriff slammed his hand on the desk. Believe me, I know. But Hayes says if they send in a response team and those things spread to the soldiers, we're looking at a contamination scenario that could threaten the entire region. They need 24 hours to prepare a proper containment protocol. We don't have 24 hours, Chen said quietly. She gestured toward the window where the first gray light of dawn was breaking. Look. They all turned to look, and Elena felt her last vestige of hope crumble. The parking lot, the fields beyond, the forest in the distance, everything was black, not with darkness, but with insects. The swarm had grown exponentially during the night. Where before there had been thousands, now there were millions, possibly billions. They covered every surface, moving in vast patterns that from this height looked almost like a single enormous organism. They're multiplying, Elena whispered. That cocoon in the cafeteria there, not just invading, they're colonizing. Marcus pressed his face against the window. What the hell is that? In the center of the parking lot, the swarm was building something. The insects had piled themselves into a massive structure, easily 30 feet tall, that looked disturbingly like a tower, or a hive. And at the base, Elena could see more cocoons, dozens of them, all man-sized. Who's missing? She asked suddenly. Has anyone checked if we're missing people? Sheriff Holloway's face went pale. He grabbed his radio. All units, sound off. I need a head count now. It took 15 minutes to complete the count. When they finished, the news was worse than anyone imagined. 43 people were unaccounted for. 43 people who'd been in the school yesterday were simply gone. No one had seen them leave. No one remembered seeing them taken. It was as if they'd vanished into thin air. The vents, Chen said, her voice hollow. When we sealed the cafeteria section, we sealed people inside with those things. Elena's mind raced. 43 cocoons. 43 missing people. The implications were too horrific to fully process. We need to see what's in those cocoons. Absolutely not, the sheriff said. We're not opening those doors. We have to know what we're dealing with. If those people are still alive, if there's a chance to save them, there's no saving them. Doc, you know that. Whatever's happening in those cocoons, it's not reversible. But Elena was already moving toward the door. Marcus grabbed her arm. Dr. Vasquez, please, don't do this. She pulled free. Those people are my patients. I took an oath to do no harm. The sheriff called after her. Going in there won't help them. It'll just get you killed too. But Elena was already in the hallway, moving toward the sealed cafeteria doors. Behind her, she heard Marcus curse and follow. Good. She didn't want to do this alone. They reached the welded doors, and Marcus began cutting through the seal with a blowtorch. The metal glowed red, then white, then finally gave way. The door swung open, and the smell hit them immediately. A sickly sweet odor of decay and something else, something chemical and wrong. The cafeteria had been completely transformed. The insects had built structures that covered every surface, creating a cathedral of writhing bodies. The clicking was deafening, a cacophony that seemed to vibrate in Elena's skull. And in the center, illuminated by the morning light streaming through the high windows, were the cocoons. They weren't made of silk like a butterfly's cocoon. They were made of the insects themselves. Thousands of bodies interlocked to form a living prison. And they were pulsing, contracting and expanding like hearts beating. Elena approached the nearest one, her hands shaking. Through gaps in the insect wall, she could see something inside. Human-shaped, but wrong. The proportions were off, elongated. And there were sounds, wet, organic sounds of transformation. Doc, we need to leave, Marcus whispered urgently. Now. But Elena couldn't move. She was transfixed by what she was seeing. The cocoon was opening. The insects were separating, falling away to reveal what they'd been protecting. It had been human once. Elena could tell that much from the remnants of clothing, from the basic shape. But it wasn't human anymore. The skin had taken on the same iridescent quality as the insect shells. The arms had elongated, with additional joints. And when it opened its eyes, its multiple, lens-like eyes, and looked directly at her, Elena understood the terrible truth. The insects weren't colonizing Millbrook, they were converting it. Converting the people. The thing that had been human opened its mouth, now filled with mandibles instead of teeth, and clicked. The sound was answered by every insect in the room. A wave of noise that physically pushed Elena backward. Then it moved. The transformed human was fast, impossibly fast. It crossed the distance between them in seconds, its many jointed legs carrying it in movements that made Elena's eyes hurt to track. Marcus raised his gun, but the creature was already on him, those mandibles snapping toward his throat. Elena grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and swung it with all her strength, connecting with the creature's head. It reeled back, clicking furiously, and Marcus scrambled away. They ran for the door, the creature and a rising tide of insects pursuing them. They made it through the doorway and Marcus slammed it shut, his hands working frantically to seal it again. Behind the door, something heavy crashed against it. Again and again, the metal denting inward with each impact. "It's strong," Marcus gasped. "Jesus Christ, it's so strong." They stumbled back to the gymnasium where Sheriff Holloway was waiting with a grim expression. The military called back. "They've moved up their timeline." "How long?" Elena asked, still shaking from what she'd seen. 6 hours. "They're sending a containment team at noon." 6 hours. Elena looked around at the frightened faces of the townspeople. 6 hours might as well be an eternity. The next few hours passed in a blur of horror. The transformed humans Elena couldn't think of a better term for them began emerging from the cafeteria section. The welded doors held for a while, but eventually the creature's combined strength tore through. Sheriff Holloway and his deputies formed a defensive line, but bullets barely slowed the transformed. Their bodies had become as hard as the insect's shells. More people were taken, dragged through vents, through cracks in the walls, through breaches the swarm created with patient, methodical destruction. Each person taken meant another cocoon, another transformation. The swarm was growing not just in numbers but in capability, creating hybrid warriors that combined human intelligence with insect efficiency. By mid-morning, they'd retreated to the gymnasium itself, the last defensible space. Less than 500 people remained of the 800 who'd sought refuge here. The rest were dead, transformed, or simply missing. Elena sat on the bleachers, numb with exhaustion and despair. Sophie had died an hour ago, her small body finally succumbing to the venom. Her mother had been taken shortly after, dragged screaming into a vent. Elena had tried to save her, had grabbed her legs and pulled, but the insects had been stronger. Marcus sat beside her, his hazmat suit torn and bloodied. "You should rest, Doc. What's the point?" She gestured at the doors, where they could hear the swarm testing the barricades. "We're not going to last 6 hours. And even if we do, what makes us think the military can stop this? We couldn't stop it. What makes them different? They have better weapons, better training. Do they have better weapons than evolution? Because that's what these things are, the next step in evolution. They're everything we're not. They work together perfectly. They adapt. They learn. They're patient." She laughed bitterly. "We never stood a chance." Sheriff Holloway's voice crackled over the radio. "All units, we've got movement on the roof. They're coming through the roof." Elena looked up at the gymnasium ceiling, 40 feet above. She could hear them now, the clicking, the scratching, the sound of countless legs moving across metal. Then she saw it, a crack forming in the ceiling tiles. "Everyone away from the center," the sheriff shouted. "Move to the walls." But there was nowhere to go. The swarm was above them, below them, around them. They were surrounded, trapped like animals in a cage, and the hunters were closing in. The ceiling gave way in multiple places at once. Insects rained down like a biblical plague, and with them came the transformed humans, 5, 10, 20 of them. They landed with inhuman grace and immediately began herding people toward the center of the gymnasium. Not killing, herding. Elena understood then. They weren't trying to eliminate the survivors. They were gathering them for transformation. Fresh material for the growing colony. Gunfire erupted as the deputies tried to fight back, but it was useless. For every transformed creature they hit, 3 more appeared. The swarm was endless, patient, inevitable. Elena felt hands, too many hands, with too many joints grab her from behind. She struggled, but it was like fighting against iron cables. She was lifted off her feet and carried toward the center of the gymnasium, where the insects were already building cocoons around the captured survivors. She saw Marcus being wrapped in a living shroud of bodies. She saw Sheriff Holloway still fighting, his gun empty, swinging it like a club until he too was overwhelmed. She saw Frank Miller, old and tough, being carried away with tears streaming down his weathered face. Then she was inside her own cocoon, and the darkness closed in. The insects covered every inch of her body, their legs gripping, their weight pressing down. She couldn't move, couldn't scream, could barely breathe. Through the gaps between bodies, she could see other cocoons forming, could hear the muffled sounds of people crying, praying, begging, and then she felt it. The first sting, then another, then dozens. The venom flooded her system, and the pain was beyond description. It felt like her cells were being torn apart and rebuilt, like her DNA was being rewritten one molecule at a time. She tried to scream, but her mouth was full of insects. She tried to fight, but her body wouldn't respond. All she could do was feel as the transformation began, as she stopped being Elena Vasquez and started becoming something else. The last thought she had as her consciousness began to fragment and reform was a memory from medical school. A professor talking about evolution, about how humans had risen to dominate the earth through intelligence and cooperation. We're the apex predator, the professor had said confidently. Nothing can challenge our position. But the professor had been wrong, because in the darkness of her cocoon, as her human mind gave way to something vast and collective, Elena understood the terrible truth. Humans had never been the apex predator. They'd just been waiting their turn to be replaced. Part 3. The arrival. The military helicopters arrived at exactly noon, just as Colonel Hayes had promised. 4 Black Hawks descended through the grey October sky, their rotors kicking up dust and debris from the parking lot. A containment team in sealed biohazard suits rappelled down, weapons ready, moving with professional precision toward the high school. Captain Sarah Mitchell led the team. She'd handled bioweapon scenarios in 3 different countries, had seen things that would break most people. But as she approached the school, even she felt her confidence waver. The building was completely covered in insects, a seething, clicking mass that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Command, this is Mitchell. The infestation is worse than satellite imagery suggested. Requesting permission to proceed with extreme prejudice protocols. Permission denied, came Hayes' voice through her headset. We need samples first. Intel suggests these organisms may have strategic military applications. Mitchell gritted her teeth. Of course, the military always saw weapons before they saw threats. Copy that. Command moving in. Her team burned through the main entrance with thermite charges. The insects recoiled from the intense heat, creating a temporary path. They entered the school with flamethrowers raised, clearing the hallway meter by meter. The interior was worse than the exterior. Every surface crawled with life. The walls weren't walls anymore, they were living structures made of interlocked insect bodies, and everywhere, hanging from the ceiling, emerging from the floors, were the cocoons. Jesus Christ, breathed Lieutenant Rodriguez, Mitchell's second in command. How many people were in this town? 8,000, Mitchell said, according to records. They moved through the transformed building, documenting everything, collecting samples. Mitchell ordered her team to tag several cocoons for extraction. These would be studied, dissected, turned into intelligence that the military could use. They reached the gymnasium. The doors had been torn off their hinges, and inside, Mitchell saw something that made her pause. The entire floor was covered in cocoons, hundreds of them, all in various stages of development, and in the center, something that looked like a massive nest or command structure made entirely of insect bodies. We need to destroy this, Rodriguez said. Burn it all. But Mitchell was staring at one of the cocoons near the front. It was opening. The insects were peeling away, revealing what was inside. It stood up slowly, unfolding to its full height as at least 7 feet tall. Mitchell recognized the remnants of a sheriff's uniform hanging from its transformed body. This had been human once. The name tag was still visible. Holloway. It looked at them with multiple lens-like eyes and clicked. The sound was different from the other insects, more complex, more nuanced. It was communication. Then it spoke. The voice was distorted, rasping, but unmistakably human in origin. You came. Mitchell's team raised their weapons, but she held up a hand. Stand down. It's trying to communicate. The Holloway thing tilted its head in a gesture that was eerily human, not trying, communicating. It took a step forward, and Mitchell noticed how fluid its movement was, how purposeful. We remember being human. What are you? Mitchell asked. Evolution. The creature gestured at the cocoons around them. Upgrade. Humanity. Obsolete. We next. You're killing innocent people. Not killing. Converting. Better, stronger. Together. It clicked, and every cocoon in the gymnasium began to stir. You will join soon. Mitchell made a decision then. Protocol be damned. She raised her flamethrower. The hell we will. But before she could fire, the gymnasium exploded into motion. Cocoons burst open. Transformed humans emerged, dozens of them moving with coordinated precision. The swarm descended from the ceiling, rose from the floor, poured through every opening. Mitchell's team fought back with everything they had. Flamethrowers, grenades, automatic weapons. The confined space became an inferno of violence and burning insects. But for every transformed creature they killed, more appeared. The swarm was endless. Fall back, Mitchell screamed. Retreat to the LZ. They ran through burning hallways, fighting their way through waves of attackers. Rodriguez went down first, dragged into a side classroom by transformed things that had once been teachers. Mitchell tried to save him, but a creature that had been a teenage girl knocked her back with inhuman strength. 2 more team members fell before they reached the parking lot. Mitchell and the remaining 3 soldiers sprinted for the helicopters, pursued by a rising tide of chittering, clicking horror. The helicopters were already lifting off. The pilots had seen what was coming and weren't waiting. Mitchell grabbed the rope ladder hanging from the nearest Black Hawk, her team members scrambling up behind her. Below, the transformed humans didn't even try to follow. They simply stood in the parking lot, watching with their lens-like eyes as the helicopters climbed into the sky. Mitchell pulled herself into the chopper, gasping for breath. Command, this is Mitchell. The town is lost. Repeat, the town is completely lost. Requesting immediate tactical nuclear strike on these coordinates. There was a long pause. Then Hayes' voice, colder than before. Negative, Mitchell. Fall back to base. We're implementing a different protocol. Sir, with all due respect, if we don't contain this now, the decision has been made. Captain, you have your orders. As the helicopter banked away from Millbrook, Mitchell looked back at the town. The entire settlement was black with the swarm. And at the center, where the high school stood, she could see structures rising, massive towers made of living bodies, reaching toward the sky like the spires of some alien cathedral. Then she saw something that made her blood freeze. The transformed humans were forming patterns in the parking lot. From this height, with so many of them working together, their bodies created shapes, letters. They spelled out a message. We spread. 3 weeks later, Elena stood at the edge of what had been Millbrook and looked out at the new world being born. She wasn't Elena anymore, not really. That consciousness had been absorbed into the collective, its memories and knowledge distributed among the swarm. But enough of her remained to appreciate the transformation, to understand what they had accomplished. The town had become a hive. Every building had been restructured, reinforced, converted into nurseries and breeding chambers. The human survivors, those few who had been kept unconverted to serve as genetic material, were kept in the deep chambers, tended by worker forms that had once been their neighbors. But Millbrook was just the beginning. The swarm had spread. Not as mindless insects, but with purpose and planning. They'd learned from Elena's medical knowledge how human infrastructure worked. They'd learned from Sheriff Holloway's tactical experience how to avoid detection. They'd learned from Frank Miller's lifetime of survival skills how to adapt to different environments. Each human converted added their knowledge to the collective. Each mind absorbed made the swarm smarter, more capable, more dangerous. The military had tried to contain them. They'd set up a perimeter, checkpoints, surveillance, but the swarm was patient. They'd waited until the soldiers relaxed their guard, until routine replaced vigilance. Then they'd struck, converting entire units in single nights. Each soldier converted gave them access to military training, to weapon systems, to classified information. The perimeter had fallen 2 days ago. Now the swarm controlled a 100-square-mile area, and they were still growing. Small towns on the periphery had been converted overnight. The residents worked to find their homes filled with insects, their families being wrapped in cocoons, their world ending not with fire or flood, but with the quiet, methodical efficiency of evolution. The part of Elena that remained mourned for Sophie, whose innocent life had been cut short, mourned for Mrs. Hendricks, who'd tried to warn them and died anyway, mourned for humanity itself, which had ruled the earth for so long and was now discovering that rule was temporary. But the larger part of her, the part that was now the swarm, felt only satisfaction. They were doing what all life does. Survive. Spread. Adapt. Humans had done the same thing for millennia, conquering and converting the world to suit their needs. The swarm was simply better at it. A scout form approached, one that had been Deputy Chen, had clicked a report. More towns identified for conversion. Military response teams tracked and mapped, resources catalogued and prioritized. The collective processed the information and made decisions. 3 new expansion vectors, 7 breeding chambers needed. resource extraction from the converted zones to be increased by 40%. Elena's remaining human consciousness tried one last time to resist, to assert individual will against the collective, but it was like screaming into a hurricane. Her voice was one among thousands now, soon to be millions, soon to be billions. The swarm was inevitable. In Washington, D.C., far from Millbrook, emergency meetings were being held. The president had been briefed. The Joint Chiefs were developing response plans. Scientists were studying the few samples Mitchell's team had brought back, trying to find weaknesses, trying to develop countermeasures, but they were too slow. Bureaucracy and politics hindered their response. They debated jurisdiction and funding while the swarm spread. They argued about disclosure and public panic while more towns fell silent in the night. By the time they decided on a military response, it was already too late. The swarm had reached the research facility where it had all begun, a black site laboratory hidden in the Pennsylvania wilderness, where military scientists had been engineering next-generation bioweapons. They'd been trying to create the perfect soldier, obedient, expendable, capable of operating in swarms. They'd succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. And now their creation had come home. The facility fell in a single night. The scientists, the soldiers, the classified research, all absorbed into the collective. With that knowledge, the swarm understood its own origins, understood the human drive to weaponize everything, to create tools of destruction in the name of protection. Ironic, the collective thought with what remained of 1,000 human minds, that humanity's end would come from their own creation. The swarm began replicating the laboratory's equipment, using converted engineers' knowledge to mass-produce new variants, flying forms for rapid spread, aquatic forms to contaminate water supplies, microscopic forms that could infiltrate undetected. Each new variant expanded their capabilities, opened new vectors of infection. Within 2 months, the swarm controlled 3 states. The military threw everything at them: nerve gas, napalm, carpet bombing, even a tactical nuclear strike on a hive cluster in Ohio. But the swarm had learned to disperse, to hide, to survive. For every hive destroyed, 3 more had already been established. The news stopped reporting after the 4th month, not because of government censorship, but because there were no news crews left unconverted. Television stations went dark. Radio stations fell silent. The internet became a wasteland of abandoned websites and unanswered posts. The last major military resistance collapsed after 6 months, when the swarm converted 3 nuclear missile silos and used the missiles not to destroy but to spread. Warheads were replaced with cocoon payloads. ICBMs became delivery vehicles for the next generation of the swarm. Moscow, Beijing, London, Tokyo, all the major cities received their gift from America in a single coordinated strike. Humanity fought. God, how they fought. Individuals, families, communities. They built walls and bunkers, stockpiled weapons and supplies, refused to surrender. But the swarm was patient. They could wait out any siege. They could find any weakness. They could convert or kill anyone who resisted. Some humans escaped to remote locations: mountains, deserts, isolated islands. They might survive for years. The collective calculated maybe decades, but eventually they would be found. The swarm was patient. Elena's consciousness, what little remained of it, watched all of this from within the collective. She saw the world she'd known crumble and die. She saw the last lights go out in the last cities. She saw the moment when the balance tipped, when the swarm population exceeded human population, when Earth officially became their planet. And in her final moment of individual thought, before that last spark of Elena Vasquez was fully absorbed into the collective consciousness, she understood the true horror of what had happened. It wasn't that humanity had lost. Humanity lost battles all the time, to disease, to disaster, to each other. That wasn't new. The horror was that humanity would be forgotten. In a few generations, there would be no one left to remember them, no one to tell their stories, to marvel at their achievements, to mourn their passing. The swarm had no use for history, no interest in art or music or literature. All of humanity's accumulated knowledge, culture, and memory would simply ... cease. Humans would become what the dinosaurs were to them: fossils in the ground. Interesting but irrelevant, a dead end in evolution's long story. And then, even that last thought dissolved, and Elena Vasquez ceased to exist entirely. Epilogue: New World. 1 year after the first clicking sound in Millbrook, the transformation was complete. The swarm had consumed everything, every human settlement, every city, every outpost. The last radio transmission from a human source had been detected 3 weeks ago: a woman somewhere in the Australian outback, singing a lullaby to her child before the transmission cut off mid-note. The Earth belonged to the swarm now. Cities had been restructured into vast hive complexes. Forests had been cleared and replanted with vegetation that better served the collective's needs. Oceans teemed with aquatic variants, mining the deep trenches for minerals. The atmosphere itself was slowly being altered, optimized for swarm physiology rather than mammalian lungs. In the deepest chamber of what had been Millbrook now, the primary nexus of the North American hive cluster, the original queen rested. She was massive, having grown to fill an entire gymnasium, her body a bloated factory producing millions of eggs per day. She had been the first to fully transform, the template from which all others had been patterned. She had been Mrs. Hendricks. The collective didn't remember her name, didn't remember her life as a retired schoolteacher, her love of gardening, her fear when she'd first heard the clicking in her walls. All of that had been consumed, converted into something useful. She was the queen now, nothing more. But sometimes, in the deep cycles when egg production slowed and the collective's attention was elsewhere, something stirred in the queen's consciousness. Not a memory those had been erased, but an echo of memory. A feeling of wrongness, of loss, of grief. It passed quickly, overwritten by the collective's imperatives, but it had been there. For just a moment, humanity had touched the swarm one last time, and then it was gone forever. From space, Earth looked different now. Where once there had been the warm glow of city lights at night, there was now the cold bioluminescence of hive structures. Where once there had been the irregular patterns of human civilization, there was now the geometric precision of optimized design. An alien observer, if one had been watching, might have noted the transformation with interest. A planet's dominant species had been replaced with remarkable efficiency. Such things happened occasionally in the universe. Evolution was brutal and unforgiving. The weak were replaced by the strong. Always, the swarm continued to grow, to adapt, to optimize. They reached the moon within 5 years, establishing colonies in the deep tunnels where human miners had once dreamed of expansion. Mars followed. Then the asteroid belt. The swarm was patient. They had time. All the time in the world, in the solar system, in the galaxy. They would spread at their own pace, consuming worlds, converting resources, expanding endlessly into the cosmic dark. And somewhere in the vast collective consciousness, distributed among billions of minds that had once been human, the last fragments of humanity's memory slowly dissolved like salt in an endless sea. Millbrook, Pennsylvania, population 8,000, known for its annual harvest festival and its friendly small-town charm, became nothing more than coordinates on a map that no human would ever read again. The clicking continued, eternal and inevitable, the heartbeat of a new world order, and the Earth, patient as always, spun on.